There are millions of groups around the world, and some are even pretty famous. But few are as famous, or shall we say infamous, as the Ku Klux Klan, otherwise known as the KKK. For over 100 years, the KKK has been a symbol of hate in America and around the world. It has also been known to have some of the deadliest people in America who have been behind some terrible crimes. But who are the most dangerous KKK members in history? Keep watching to find out. Frank Anona. Frank Anona was a modern KKK member who tried to keep the Klan's hateful message alive in the 21st century. You see, Klan numbers have been dwindling for a few decades, but there are still those that are loyal to it. One of these was Frank, who was the imperial wizard of the traditionalist American Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. He had been a member of the Klan for over 30 years, and boy, was he dedicated to it. And while some current Klan members have tried to modernize the Klan and make it more palatable for the 21st century, Frank was having none of that. In fact, the ethos of the traditionalist American Knights of the Ku Klux Klan was to be as similar to the old Klan as possible. It has described itself as a white patriotic Christian organization that bases its roots back to the Ku Klux Klan of the early 20th century. And how did Frank try to do this? Well, in 2014, after Michael Brown was killed by the police, he handed out pamphlets advertising his small Klan. He even went as far as appearing on TV to encourage police to hurt protesters, even to the point of violence or death, even though they were unarmed. He also implied the Klan was ready for war in the wake of the protests. Of course, like many Klan members, he said that he was simply promoting American values. So yeah, his Klan wasn't big, with only a few dozen members, but it sure made up for its size with hate. But what Frank didn't know was that there was danger right under his roof. Who was the danger? It was none other than Melissa, his wife. In 2017, alarm bells went off when he didn't show up to work for several days straight. Apparently frantic, Melissa told the police that he'd gone out of town for a job, but hadn't returned. She even went online to beg for help in bringing him home, but this turned out to all be a facade. The police went searching, and after a while, Frank's body turned up in Belgrade, Missouri, 70 miles southwest of St. Louis. Once this discovery was made, Melissa tried to cover it up and blamed her son. That's right. According to her, Paul Jinkerson Jr. has shot and killed Frank after he asked her for a divorce. But believe it or not, this was not the last time she would change her story. Once in jail, she finally fessed up that she had killed him while under the influence. "I fired both shots that killed my husband," she said, and once the deed was done, she began an elaborate cover-up. First, the walls of their home were cleaned with Frank's blood, and the bloody sheets were thrown away. As for his body, well, she drove to Belgrade, Missouri and dumped it, hoping she wouldn't get caught. But she was caught, and along with her son, faced several charges, including first-degree murder, abandoning a corpse, and tampering with evidence. Their sentence? Life in prison for Melissa and 59 years for her son. It was a sorry story that ended in tragedy for the entire family. Frank died and left behind a legacy of hate towards others and a deep desire to honor the Klan of old. But the hate he put out into the world didn't save him from the killer that was right under his roof, William J. Simmons. If you're not well versed in KKK history, you might not know that the Klan actually had a revival in the 20th century. Yep, the first Klan had dwindled out and was pretty much obsolete until the 1910s when someone had the bright idea to bring it back. That someone is our second entry, William J. Simmons. A bit of backstory about Simmons. He was born in 1880 and served in the Spanish-American War after he failed to study medicine. After the war was over, he didn't immediately jump into recreating one of the world's worst hate groups. He actually became a preacher for a while, but got hit by a car in 1915. It was while he was in recovery from this accident that he saw the film Birth of a Nation and decided that the Klan needed to be brought back. And how do you bring the KKK back to life? Simmons's plan was to get his hands on the Klan's original prescript, create rules based on it, and add some stuff he'd seen in the movies. Yikes. He was able to get a bunch of people he knew to join, and they kicked off this new era of the Klan by climbing a mountain and burning a cross on Thanksgiving Eve 1915. Well, they were nothing if not dramatic. As time passed, this Klan 2.0 was able to get thousands of people to join its cause, and it took them in with open arms, as long as they weren't Jewish, Catholic, or from Eastern Europe. These impressive recruitment numbers were partially because Simmons and his deputy Roy Alonzo Davis went around the country giving speeches and trying to convince people of the KKK's benefit. Perhaps he was so busy spreading this message that he didn't notice that those in his circle were conspiring against him. Simmons wasn't going to live out his days as the second imperial wizard of the KKK. He wasn't assassinated, but Hyam Wesley Evans, who's also on this list, led a coup against him. Evans convinced other Klan members to conspire against Simmons, and he was stripped of his power and booted out from the group. He wasn't completely alone, as his ever-loyal deputy, Roy Alonzo Davis, joined him to create yet another white supremacist hate group. This time they were called the Knights of the Flaming Sword, and of course, Simmons was its imperial wizard. Showing that they truly had a penchant for this sort of thing, the Knights of the Flaming Sword were able to poach thousands of members from the KKK and had over 60,000 devotees at the height of its power. power. But these good times were not to last, and just like the Klan, the Knights lost a lot of members by the mid-20th century. There are several reasons for this. The new political scene in America made it way less cool to be Klansman, and the Klan itself was always in one scandal or another. In 1921, the U.S. House Committee on Rules had Simmons testify about the Klan's activities, and he mostly tried to distance himself from it. But this didn't mean he was done with the Klan. In fact, he was never done with the Klan, and remained a member until he died in 1945. What is truly evil about William J. Simmons is that he wouldn't let the KKK remain in history after it had already come to an end. Instead, he chose to revive it and directly caused it and all of the atrocities it committed to continue. J Stevenson. The interesting thing about a lot of the people on our list is that their stories are connected, usually through scandalous means. Take J Stevenson, for example, who had a massive falling out with Hyam Wesley Evans, the guy who kicked William J. Simmons out of the KKK. How did he find himself in the middle of the KKK's infighting? Let's take it back a bit. Stevenson was born in 1891 in the state of Texas and spent his early years being a Casanova who married, impregnated, and abandoned 2 different women before he was even 30. After skipping out on his second family, he began a career in the coal business in Evansville, Indiana, but he was about to become very preoccupied with the KKK after being recruited into it by Joseph M. Huffington. Now, while Stevenson was a deadbeat father and a hate-filled man, he was quite industrious when it came to KKK affairs. Not only did he lead the recruitment of thousands of other men, but also founded Fiery Cross, which was the Klan's newspaper. All this hard work quickly got him noticed by the head honchos at the Klan, and he became very important very soon. In fact, he was so important that when Hyam Wesley Evans launched his bid to take over Klan leadership from William J. Simmons, Stevenson was one of his biggest supporters. As you know by now, the takeover bid was successful, and when Evans became Klan leader, his supporters were rewarded. Stevenson was put in charge of recruitment for the KKK and was made the Grand Dragon of Indiana. This gave him not only power but money, as he was taking a cut of recruitment fees. But as is tradition with KKK leaders, he fell into disagreements with Evans soon after and tried to break away and start another KKK faction without him. It got so bad that he went back to former leader William J. Simmons for support. He was so emboldened by his position in Indiana that he once famously said, "I am the law in Indiana." But Stevenson was about to be taken down a peg, though it had nothing to do with his activities as a Klansman. In 1925, he abducted a woman named Madge Oberholzer and violently assaulted her in a train car. Not only did he intimately assault her, but he also bit her all over her body, and the pain was so severe that she considered taking her own life multiple times. And despite this, Stevenson did not want to release her and demanded that she marry him. But eventually, when she was at the point of death, he took her back to her parents, and she recounted the ordeal before she died from her wounds. Stevenson was tried for her abduction and murder and was sentenced to life imprisonment, but was released in 1956. But at that point, the damage had been done not just to his reputation, but to the KKK as well. Being associated with a man who had done such horrific things made them look bad and turned a lot of people away. It was also not a great look for Stevenson because he had been a promoter of Protestant womanhood, prohibition, and family values. But here he was, plying a woman with alcohol, kidnapping her, and assaulting her to the point that she died. This would not be Stevenson's last assault case, as in 1961, he was arrested and fined for trying to assault a teenage girl. He died in 1966 at the age of 71. The KKK has housed some truly reprehensible people, but J Stevenson was hateful not just to black people, but to women as well, even women who he had worked with. Now that is truly evil. Thomas Robb. One thing that is consistent within KKK history is that even when the Klan is declining or in a bad state, someone always comes along who wants to revive it and keep it going. In the late 20th century, one of these people was Thomas Robb. Right before Robb took over the KKK in 1989, called the UKA at that point, the group had suffered a devastating lawsuit that basically bankrupted it. But Robb believed in the potential for the Klan to rise again and went on a rebrand mission. The first thing to change were the names. No longer was it called the Ku Klux Klan, but the Knights Party. And rather than calling himself the Grand Wizard as those before him had done, he went with the title National Director. He also got rid of the pesky initial rights of his predecessors. Now anyone who wanted to join the Klan could do so through a form. Now you're probably wondering if he got rid of the Klan's hateful messages and violent activities as part of the rebrand. No, he did not. Just a few years prior, and not too long after they had set it on fire, several Klan members tried to enter the Southern Poverty Law Center's office, and of course the hateful rhetoric has continued. When President Obama won the U.S. elections in 2008, Rob said that it was a race war between our people, who I see as the rightful owners and leaders of this great country, and their people, the blacks. And when Donald Trump was running for president, Rob wasted no time stating his endorsement, and it was not a mute or quiet affair. He wrote a glowing front-page endorsement that caused so much controversy that the Trump team had to disavow it before voting began. And while the Klan that he leads is nowhere near as popular or powerful as the Klans of old, he had kept a lot of ties to fellow white supremacist organizations. These include the Aryan Nations, who had him speak at its World Congress, and the popular website Stormfront. But don't let his dedication to the cause fool you. He still found time to allegedly engage in financial fraud and was once accused of taking a $20,000 donation that was made to the Klan. The craziest part, Rob works to this day as a pastor. The Christian Revival Center in Bergman, Arkansas is right in line with Rob's beliefs, and even said on its website that we believe that the Anglo-Saxon, Germanic, Scandinavian, and kindred people are the people of the Bible. God separated and anointed Israel. Our people must resist the call of Satan, which the Bible says will come disguised as light and love, brotherly interracial love. This just goes to show that even in the 21st century, the KKK still finds places where its message is welcome, even in a church. Rob is the national director of the Knights Party, even at the age of 77, and doesn't look like he'll be turning a new leaf anytime soon.
I think our message is mainstream. We don't promote hatred of anybody. We think everybody has a right to love their heritage and culture. But we're concerned with how come when white people say, I love my people, I love my heritage, they want to call that a racial hatred.
David Duke. David Duke is one of the most recognizable Klansmen of all time, even to those who don't know much about the Klan. And this would make sense, given how dedicated he has been to its ideology, even from a young age. He was born in 1950 in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and began his career as a Klansman when he was just in high school. He had taken an interest in white supremacist teaching and read several books on the topic as a young man. Finally, he took the bold step of becoming initiated into the KKK before he even graduated. Talk about dedication. In 1968, he enrolled at the Louisiana State University and hit the ground running, not with his studying, but with starting his own white supremacy group called the White Youth Alliance. Duke had been reading about the Nazis and Hitler for years, but it was in college that his interest really began to flourish. He was known to attend events in Nazi costumes, celebrated Hitler's birthday, and even took a road trip for the American Nazi Party conference in Virginia. Having got a ton of practice in white supremacy in college, David Duke's post-college years were rather interesting. He became very prominent in white supremacist circles, and in 1974 founded the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. He entered the role at just 26 years old and stayed on for 6 years. His tenure was quite memorable in that he permitted women and Catholics to join, which was something his predecessors weren't big fans of. But even though he was dedicated to the KKK, he was involved in some very shady dealings. He was forced to leave the KKK in 1980 after it was revealed that he'd been selling its membership information to the FBI. Then he decided to try his hands out at politics and ran for all sorts of positions. He was elected into the Louisiana State Senate in 1989 after failing in both 1975 and 1979, and also unsuccessfully tried to run for governor of Louisiana, U.S. President, and the U.S. Congress. Remember when he was accused of selling secrets to the FBI? Well, that wasn't the last time he had his hands in the cookie jar. All through his political career, he has been plagued with accusations of stealing funds for himself. Duke also flip-flopped a lot on his beliefs. In the 90s, he claimed that he had changed his ways and abandoned his former racist beliefs. But years later, we walked back and said that he still believed in the cause of the KKK and continued to promote different racist beliefs. The 1990s ended on a low note for Duke as he was sent to jail for 15 months for financial fraud and tax evasion. But once he was out, all bets were off. This time he had the power of the internet, and this allowed him to amplify his message. He's since taken to giving commentary on politics, endorsing political candidates, mainly Donald Trump, and living up to his reputation as a former KKK wizard.
However, what makes me different is I also demand respect for the rights and the heritage of European Americans. I'm overjoyed to see Donald Trump and most Americans embrace most of the issues that I've championed for years.
But even though he continues to be in the news, some are pushing back. He has been banned from Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, and was even removed from Germany for trying to start a far-right rally. Even though he has been active for decades and has repeatedly scammed his own supporters, many still idolize Duke. Sadly, this probably means we haven't seen the last of him. Hyam Wesley Evans. I've talked about the infamous KKK coup in the 1920s and how William J. Simmons was removed from power. But what about the man who instigated the coup, Hyam Wesley Evans? He is especially deadly because he was the one who took the KKK to the height of its power in the 20th century and caused untold harm to its victims. Evans was born in Ashland, Alabama in 1881 and grew up in Texas. After training to be a dentist and setting up shop in Dallas, he joined the KKK in 1920. One notable thing about Evans is that he was ambitious. He'd been at the KKK barely a year when he was promoted to Exalted Cyclops and began instigating hate crimes against others. But this wasn't enough. He had big plans for the Klan, and to make them a reality, he needed power. So we went for the obvious logical option and staged a coup. He convinced the current Imperial Wizard to restructure the Klan in a way that would give him more power, and once that was done, he ousted him from the role. Now that he had the Klan under his control, it was time to set his plans in motion. But what were the plans in the first place? In a word, Protestant. The Klan already favored white men, but Evans believed that Protestants were the true owners of America. In his book, The Klan's Fight for Americanism, he said, "These are the instincts of loyalty to the white race, to the traditions of America, and to the spirit of Protestantism, which has been an essential part of Americanism ever since the days of Roanoke and Plymouth Rock." They are condensed into the Klan slogan, Native White Protestant Supremacy. This meant not only reworking the Klan from the inside, but also getting more people on the outside to join. And for what it's worth, Evans did grow the Klan's numbers in the early 20th century. There is some debate around the numbers, but it's estimated that at its peak, the Klan had between 2.5 to 6 million people. Evans's infamous 4th of July 1923 gathering was so large that he addressed a crowd of over 200,000 people. From what we can see, Evans's strategy worked in two parts. First, he recruited members from states like Illinois and Michigan, which grew its influence. He also took a keen interest in politics and getting pro-Klan members elected. This meant that the KKK had the numbers and political influence, and Evans was even featured in a Time magazine cover in the 1920s. But just as things had risen, they eventually took a tumble. First, Evans had a major falling out with his former ally, D.C. Stevenson, over money. The two traded accusations for years, and it seemed like the Klan would be split in two because of their feud. As you might remember from earlier in this video, Stevenson eventually went to jail for assaulting and killing a woman. But that didn't mean that all was well with Evans. On the contrary, he continued to fight with other members of the Klan. They sued him, he threatened them, and people began leaving in droves. There's also the fact that Stevenson's court case cast a negative light on the Klan. By the time the Great Depression hit, its membership was but a fraction of what it used to be. Evans eventually resigned from the Klan in 1939 and began working in construction, though he ran into some legal trouble and received a fine. As for his political stances, well, he softened his attitudes towards Catholics but didn't disassociate with the Klan. In fact, he had been speaking at Klan events as late as 1949 and was an honored former member until his death in 1966. There have been many dangerous people in the KKK, but it takes a special type of danger to double-cross your fellow Klansmen and then spread its message to hundreds of thousands of others in just a few years. Nathan Bedford Forrest. When it comes to the white supremacist ideas at the center of the KKK, few have been more committed to its cause than Nathan Bedford Forrest. Don't believe me? Forrest served as both a high-ranking KKK leader and a Confederate soldier. If that's not dedication, I don't know what is. Forrest was born in 1821 in Tennessee, and let's just say he led an interesting life. It all started when he was 21 and murdered two men who had killed his uncle. A new man, he took up a new and exciting career in slave trade. Well, I did say that he was dedicated to white supremacy. Throughout the 1850s, he plied his trade buying and selling enslaved people and made a fortune at it. Fun fact, one of the enslaved people he traded was a girl thought to be Frederick Douglass' descendant. By the turn of the Civil War, Forrest for front and center for enlistment, even though he technically didn't even have to. But he did, and even used some of his own money to buy supplies for his regiment. At the same time, it wasn't his money that made a name for him in the Confederacy, it was his war tactics. He was so good at combat and developing war strategy that by the time the Civil War ended, he had become a general with the nickname, the Wizard of the Saddle. And what does a man called the Wizard of the Saddle do after the Confederacy loses? He tried to do other things besides the now illegal slave trade, but didn't have much luck. Eventually, he took up farming using the exploited and very overworked prison labor. Some things just never change. And then came his stint with the KKK. The first wave of the KKK was mainly made up of ex-Confederate soldiers, so Forrest found himself right at home, and just as he had with slave trade, was successful within the KKK. He soon became the Grand Wizard, and things got very, very bloody. You see, the KKK KKK isn't just famous for wearing white robes and burning crosses, they killed a lot of people. One of the most prominent examples of this was during the 1868 presidential elections, when the KKK wanted to stop black people from voting, especially in states like Ohio and Louisiana. The idea was that if they stopped black and Republican voters from casting their ballots, Ulysses S. Grant would not win the election. The result of this was over 1,000 black people killed in KKK attacks orchestrated by Forrest and many more injured. But despite their worst efforts, Grant went on to win the election and become president of the United States. But what is even wilder is that Forrest, the slave trader, Confederate soldier, and foundational member of the KKK, actually turned away from it later in life. Even more shocking was that he tried to get other Klansmen to do the same. That was one of the less successful endeavors in his life, and the Klan continued to exist, as we all know. He eventually became a vocal advocate for the rights of black Americans before he died in 1877, Robert Shelton. Honestly, the 20th century is filled with KKK infighting, betrayals, and defections. And perhaps one of the more interesting these comes from Robert Shelton, who leveraged a rift in the Klan to secure power for himself. This saga began in 1960, after the death of the KKK's 7th Grand Wizard, Eldon Edwards, after which he was succeeded by a man named Roy Davis. This marked a period of strife within the KKK, and eventually many members left the original Klan. Robert was one of these, and after becoming a free agent, focused his efforts on getting members for his new Klan, the Alabama Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. Eventually, the Alabama Knights became the United Klans of America, UKA, and began directly competing with the KKK. Under the leadership of Grand Wizard Robert Shelton, it even outnumbered the KKK at a point, and it seemed that the going was good. But it's the KKK we're talking about. If things are going well for them, someone somewhere is getting hurt. The House Committee on Un-American Activities took an interest in its affairs and demanded that Shelton give up information about it. He refused and served a year in jail. Once he came out, the mayhem continued, and there were several violent incidents against African Americans on record. When the University of Alabama was being integrated, for example, there were attacks on black students, and some of those involved were arrested, and Shelton paid their bail. There was also the devastating bomb attack on the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, which claimed the lives of 4 black girls. From NAACP offices to activist homes, the UKA did not hold back in pushing its message or hurting anyone who stood in its way or who happened to not be white. But the UKA was about to meet its match thanks to the blowback from one of these attacks. In 1981, a 19-year-old African-American man named Michael Donald was lynched by a mob that included UKA member James Knowles. But the Klan wasn't about to get away with it. All those involved were arrested and went on to either be given jail sentences or died. The case also cast a bad light on the UKA, which was nowhere as socially acceptable in the 1980s as it had been earlier in the century. Beulah May Donald, the mother of the victim, then slapped the UKA with a civil suit and got $7 million in damages. If you're wondering where the UKA had that much money to pay, it didn't. And because it didn't, it went bankrupt, and a judge gave Beulah May Donald ownership of its headquarters. This represented in many ways the downfall of the UKA. Its reputation was thrashed, it had no money, and its members were demoralized. Eventually, the Klan, which had once been the biggest in the nation and had tens of thousands of members, disbanded. And what about Robert Shelton, you ask? The once very public Grand Wizard of the UKA became a bit of a recluse and was rarely seen or heard from after the disbandment of the Klan. But if you're thinking that he gave up on the Klan or its racist ideology over time, you'd be wrong. In one of the last interviews he gave before his death in 2003, he said, "The Klan is my belief, my religion, but it won't work anymore. The Klan is gone, forever. If any group on the planet has had some dangerous people within it, it is the KKK. From assaulters to murderers to backstabbers to swindlers, every form of dangerous person you can imagine has been a member of the Klan. And while we could name thousands of them, those on our list are some of the worst of the worst. Want to learn more about the KKK? Click the card on your screen now."